Hey guys, welcome back. I apologize for the massive gap in my videos. Beta has kept me really busy the past couple of weeks. However, after 2 long weeks, we have done a lot. I kind of feel like beta's closing up here soon. We've leveled as fast as we could using mini specs. We've done normals, heroics, and even raid testing. So now that it's all done, I thought I'd do a few videos regarding the mini specs that us as warlocks can choose from. The first video will be strictly about leveling, then I'll do dungeon specs, and then raiding specs. Before we begin, I just want to say that I'm not the tell-all for warlock specs. We've got a knowledgeable and experienced team over in the Warlock Discord who spend every waking moment trying to min-max, theorycraft, and find the best specs that us as Warlocks can do. With that, for much more in-depth talk on these specs and anything Warlock related, please check out the Warlock Discord. The link will be in the description. So let's get started. I guess just to start by saying, this is my opinion on the specs. I feel like in my heart, these specs are the best that we can choose from. That being said, if you agree or disagree, let's talk about it in the comments. Now, when it comes to being a Warlock or leveling as a Warlock, unlike most other specs, we don't have one cookie cutter spec that you must be to level proficiently. Rather, instead, we have many specs to choose from, and it changes based on what you're doing and how you're leveling. Are you dungeon cleaving? Are you open world questing? Are you solo farming slave pins? Each route, in my opinion, has a proper spec, so let's go over them. Side note, you don't have to be these specs to properly level. This is just for those looking to min-max a little bit while leveling and care about my opinion, and I just wanted to put my input out there as I've experienced it all. So leveling. First, let's talk about open world questing. There's a few specs that I would choose for questing, depending on your gameplay, what you prefer, and also what server you're on. To start, if you're on a PvP server and expect to see a lot of world PvP, I will always suggest an SLSL build. That is the Siphon Life and the Soul Link build. Now, you can't get Soul Link and Siphon Life until you're level 61. However, you can be set up at 60 to lead you in that direction. This is the spec that I would suggest. I choose this build due to the obvious, Soul Link and Siphon Life. Together, they're pretty nutty. Your tankiness is on the next level, and being able to sack Voidwalker whenever you want for a massive shield, and of course being able to fell dom another Voidwalker out for the same shield will make you hard to kill. Now, you notice since you're only level 70 that we can't get Siphon Life, Demonic Knowledge, Demonic Resilience, things that complement this build perfectly, but allows you to get Soul Link, along with Improved Corruption, Empowered Corruption, Improved Agony, Soul Siphon, Nightfall, making you not only tanky, but your dots actually hit really hard. Once at 61, obviously take Siphon Life and fill in after that with points in like Curse of Exhaustion, Grim Reach, Demonic Knowledge, and whatever else you want to add to your toolkit. Now for those wondering why they can't use a Felguard build for world PvP, you can. I've done it countless times and it's super fun in PvP with the Felguard. His charge is nutty and it stuns, so it works like an interrupt on a rather short cooldown, and of course you get Soul Link with this build as well. He cleaves, which might not help too much in world PvP on solo, but it also does add a little bit extra damage. The reasoning behind me suggesting SLSL over the Felguard build is that you lose a lot of dot damage going Felguard, since your Felguard makes up for the damage. However, in PvP encounters, there's many ways for an enemy to take your Felguard out of the game. Frost Nova, Spheres, Banishes, etc, etc. While yes, this can still happen if you're SLSL and you have your Voidwalker or a Fel Hunter out. However, people tend to ignore those pets rather than the Felguard who's charging in and just messing them up the whole time, forcing their hand on handling your pet. In any matter, this is the build I would suggest for Felguard at 60. This gives you Felguard and being able to drop into Imp Corruption, which is mandatory in my opinion if you plan to see some PvP action. Your future points I'd suggest to put it into AF to further give you damage. Now, for those on PvE servers, or even PvP servers heavily skewed in the way and you're not too worried about PvP, well, both these specs I just linked to you would be fine for questing. You don't need the survivability as you would dealing with PvP encounters. Instead, you want sustainability, not survivability. How long can you go without sitting down and drinking or eating? The goal here is to level as fast and efficiently as possible with as little downtime, and there's 2 specs that are far superior to the former specs I've shown you. Before going into them, the reason I benched Felguard for this is that while yeah, you can for sure chain pull and do major damage with minimal downtime, at some point you will have to stop to heal your pet and yourself, cast another pet out, or just have to worry about your Felguard in general. These specs, you don't have to worry about anything, you're just chain pulling. The first one is Affliction with UA. This is my favorite leveling build and seems to be better the worse your gear is, which is probably why I like it, because my gear on the beta was garbage. This is the build that I would suggest. Not only is this the most fun questing build in my opinion, but it's also the safest, allowing you to have an instant Hallow Terror while still having beefy talents like Demonic Embrace and Imp Hellstone. And let's not forget about Dark Pact. Free mana that helps your mana regen exponentially. Mix that with Siphon Life and the downtime you have is virtually non-existent. Not only that, but your dots hit hard. The hardest they can hit, really. UA itself is an amazing spell with a shorter cast time to be able to just spam out as you level. I know it can seem counterintuitive to have to cast something while you're running and gunning, but I promise you that it feels flawless. You see a group of mods, you put UA up on all of them and then cast your instant dots, or pull everything to you with your instant dots, smack an instant Hallow Terror down, and then put UAs up on everybody. Any way you want to do, you can. Now the other spec is my second favorite, and honestly, it's so close that it's hard to say it's not my favorite, and that's SMDS, Shadow Mastery and Demonic Sacrifice. This is the build I would suggest. Right away you notice a few things. First off, no UA, no improved Howl of Terror, no Contagion, and no Dark Pact. Instead, you sacrifice all that to be able to, well, sacrifice one of your demons. Preferably Succubus for the 15% damage, or my favorite, the Voidwalker for health regen. Whichever you choose is up to you. The reason I prefer dim sacking the Voidwalker is that you quite literally do not need to ever sit down and regen. You just go non-stop. Chain dotting up everything. Between that, Siphon Life, the constant insane health regen from the Voidwalker sack, and the rework talent improved Drain Soul, allowing you to clip mobs as they die for an immediate 50% on your mana regen back, you rarely find yourself sitting and sipping if you're playing correctly. I've gone literally hours without sitting and drinking while in this spec. The better gear you have, the stronger the spec is. As for which of these specs to choose from, I would suggest to play both of them and get a feel for what you prefer. Okay, well, let's be real. Many of us will be in a hurry to level, and all of us don't want to deal with the crowded outlands, okay? So naturally, most of us will dungeon cleave. A lot like questing, there's some options for specs that you can choose from. I won't go over all of them, just the ones that I personally feel like would be the best choice for these scenarios. Now, we don't get Seed of Corruption until 70, so in the meantime, let's look at our AoE options for those speedrunners. Starting with the scenario many people will be doing, and that's geared players in Nax gear, speedrunning via dungeon cleave. For that, only one spec comes to mind, and that's worth running, and that's DSES, Demonic Sacrifice and Ember Storm. This is the spec that I would suggest. The beauty of this spec is how much fire damage you have. Also, tip, use a Firestone. You might as well. Why not? You don't need a wand. With Imp Emo, Ember Storm, Aftermath, and eventually Pyroclasm, which you ultimately aren't the best proc rates as we all know, but they do happen frequently enough to take notice. On top of that, you're sacking your Imp for 50% more fire damage. Your gameplay revolves around spreading emos as your tank gathers the mobs, run in while casting whatever curse you want. I personally prefer COE. And then as soon as you're in range, just start hellfiring. Yes, hellfiring. Over rain of fire. It hits much harder. Just trust me. Of course, pay attention to your health and don't kill yourself. The reason I chose this over dropping down and taking Shadow Fury as well. Shadow Fury's stun is really nice. The damage is nice as well. It's about the damage of a Shadow Burn, but you know, AoE. You have to waste quite a few filler points in order to reach just that Shadow Fury. Shadow and Flame and whatever else you decide to take to reach Shadow Fury is more or less worthless in my opinion, when the goal is just to do as much damage as possible in AoE form. This is the best build subjectively speaking when it comes to zug-zugging dungeon cleaves. Now, if you plan the dungeon cleave, but maybe you're not in a hurry, or maybe your group's not as die hard, maybe you're not in Nax gear, but you know that you want a dungeon cleave, I'd suggest a nice Felguard build. This is what I would suggest. A pretty simple spec that does a respectable amount of damage while not leaving you after the pulls like it would be if you went Shadow or Fire Destro. This time we only put 2 points into Improved Corruption so that we can match the GCD, and then we will fill the rest in on the Destro side for some beefy Shadow Bolts. Your goal here is to simply put up Corruption, then Immolate, and then spam Shadow Bolts, while your Felguard does what he does best, pumps. Be mindful of your Felguard though. It's not like private servers where he smartly goes behind the target. Rather, it seems like he goes in a straight line from wherever you send him from. So if you see him standing and stuff or getting cleaved, call him back real fast and reposition. Then just let him charge right back in. A quick note about the other specs. Affliction is not a good spec in my opinion to pick while dungeon cleaving. I honestly think it's arguably the worst spec to be if you're killing things quickly, simply because the mobs die before you can get your dots to tick. As for Shadow Destro, spamming Shadow Bolts all the time leads to not only mana issues, but threat issues. Fire Destro can work as well in dungeon cleaves pretty well since you already sack your Imp for the 50% fire damage. You just can't go all the way down to Shadow and Flame. However, like I mentioned, it's not the most important talent in a fast cleave. And lastly, I've already made a video about this, but it's worth mentioning as a final choice for us Warlocks is, you know, soloing Slaypins. Yes, we can do it. Yes, it's pretty easy. And yes, it's worth it as it's way better than questing by a significant amount, but beware. It's less XP per hour than if you had a solid dungeon cleave group. Decision's yours. I won't go into detail with the Slaypins farm, and instead, I'll just link the video in the description, and maybe if I can figure out how to get the link on the video on the screen like these other pro YouTubers have. Well, that's it guys. I think that's it for the day. Like I said, this is just a subjective and what I believe in my heart is the best specs, but also what I prefer. I just wanted to start this series off as soon as I can. I'll be back in a couple days and we'll go over suggested specs for doing dungeons at 70 for normals and heroics, and then we'll do raid specs. Until then, much love my Warlock family.